Hello, I'm Graham Fitch, coming to you from Steinways in London, and I'm going to be talking about fingering fundamentals, those things that we do when we first start learning a new piece. That's one of our first jobs after we've played the piece through a couple of times, not too many more times, because otherwise we start to ingrain all sorts of nonsense, maybe some wrong notes, some guesswork there. So a couple of read-throughs is good. Then we start working out fingering. And I'm going to give you a few thoughts, really, ideas on how that might happen. First thing to do is to have a pencil right here. I usually end up with it in my mouth. And, scribble, and then an eraser, rub out until I've got the fingering that suits my hand. So I guess the first thing I'd like to just suggest is that the fingering that we find in our editions is just a suggestion. It's not to be taken as gospel. So what we do is we try the fingering that's given to us, and then we might compare with other editions. Let's say we've got IMSLP, the Petrucci library. Perhaps we've got other scores on our shelves. Then we just see, how does that fingering compare with another fingering? I'm going to start off with an example from Haydn. This is the A-flat Sonata, Hoboken 46. And there's a spot here in the second theme, it's actually bar 18 for those of you that like to know these things, where the editorial, let me just play you a bit. Now the editorial fingering in the left hand starts with a 3, and then it moves to a 5 here on the D. Now that, for my hand doesn't really like that contraction and then a sudden opening to the fourth finger. That feels a little clumsy in my hand. So I came up with my own solution, which was to use a 3 here and then to reuse the 3 there, meaning that I have less distance to travel from the fourth finger, the E-flat fourth finger, to the F fourth finger. So what I would do is, if you think of a tennis match where you've got a volley, one side is volleying to the other side, and then eventually one of them wins. And of course the most exciting tennis matches are where the volleys go on, the rallies go on for a long time. So here's what I would do. I would practice one in alternation with the other. And now their fingering, my fingering, their fingering, my fingering, until the one that suits me better reveals itself. It wins, if you will, it wins the rally. So then the next part of the fingering that they give here, they suggest a 3, 4, 2. I don't really like that stretch between 4 and 2. I prefer 2 and ending with a 1, 2, 3, 1. So again, I would bat that back and forth until the better fingering reveals itself to me, then write it in the score. And it's really helpful to write it in the score. Do not hesitate to cross out fingering that's from the publisher or from the editor, because it's only one possibility. Sometimes fingering reveals itself not necessarily at the beginning of a passage, but perhaps halfway through. And I've got here the opening of the A major two-part invention of Bach. Now, the beginning, I could start with, there's nothing in this score, so I've got to come up with my own fingering. It's an Urtext score. So let's say I started with a 3. Let me play it for you first. So there's no fingering written in. If I started, let's say, with a 3, that's not so great because it puts my thumb on a black key. So let me start. I don't want to start with a 2 because that would involve a crossover. Nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's a bit laborious. So I would start with a 4. Let me try a 4. That's great. Now the choice is, do I put my thumb on the B or do I put my thumb on the A? So I experiment. I see what would happen if I put my thumb on the B. Feels good. Then I've got to put another thumb on this A. So maybe it makes more sense to put the thumb on the A originally here. And that means I get all of these notes in one hand position, which is economical. So this, this. Now I've got to get down to my B, so let me use my second finger as a kind of hinge to get to the B. Now I've got that position under my hand. Then if I put my thumb on the D, my hand can open up into the final hand position. So then if I break that up, position number 1, actually, and then so what I started off doing was to writing in the thumb on the A, and then the second finger on the F sharp, and then the thumb on the D. And from there, I could work backwards and forwards. So it's not always at the beginning of the passage that you get the fingering. Another principle of good fingering is to avoid stretches between the fingers wherever possible. If you look at how the hand works, it opens between 1 and 2 quite far, but it doesn't really want to open between the fingers. And I'm looking at Opus 10, number 1, Chopin, the notorious bar, I would say, notorious amongst anybody that's ever tried to play this piece. Chopin's fingering, or the given fingering, is often this. Bar 31. Now that puts an enormous stretch between 3 and 2, when we could actually finger it 5, 2, 1, and then shift across. See, then I avoid the stretch, shift. Well, let me do that better. Now the next bar again, a huge stretch, I would say an unfeasible stretch between 4 and 5, when we could actually start with 2, 3. I'm not missing any notes out, I'm just regrouping the patterns to avoid stretches. Here's another example from Chopin's Second Piano Concerto, the opening, often played and written to look like this. With stretches. But if we start off with, I can actually start with a third finger and then move across. So from a stretched out position, I go to closed positions and then just shift across. And there's no tension in that, whatever. When we've got fast passage work, try and use fewer thumbs. So I've got a chromatic scale here. From the last movement of Beethoven's Third Concerto. Rather than use the standard chromatic fingering 3-1, 3-1 with the occasional 2, I'm using groups of 4 wherever possible, groups of 3 where I can't use a group of 4. And that means that there are fewer thumbs in that passage, which would slow me down. Trill fingerings, we can experiment with 3 and 2. Probably the first trill fingering we ever use is 3 and 2. I'm thinking of Mozart. And then when we want maybe stronger trills, we can use 1 and 3. And just rotate, slightly lower wrist, and use my rotary movements to manage that. Another thought, when we've got waltz or stride left-hand parts, we use our pinky finger down here. And then a lot of people I see do this sort of thing. They come up and reuse the pinky on the chord above. But actually, it's more economical to use a different finger, perhaps a 4. Do you see what I did here? I'm using a double thumb. Rather than coming up with the whole hand like this, which I could do, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but I find it more convenient to stay in a more closed position, 4th finger rather than a 5. Now sometimes obviously we have to use a 5, but where possible, see if you can think of the pinky as belonging to the bass note and the other fingers for the remainder of the chord. I do want to quickly talk about finger substitutions. We often find these in editions. I've got the Schubert G-flat impromptu in front of me, and I think here the problems with the substitutions are they outweigh the advantages. I'm looking at bar 4 of the G-flat impromptu, where the editor has written substitute and another substitution here. Now, I like the second substitution, but I do not like the first one. There's not enough time to do it. It's clumsy. So then I would just use 5-5. I like that substitution. And again, what I'm doing there is being very selective about the fingering that I follow from the edition. I'm not blindly obeying it. I just want to do very quickly talk about redistributions where we might change around which hand plays which note. Sometimes it's right hand, left hand written in the score, but we can take some of the lower notes with the right hand or the upper notes. Bartók in his Suite Opus 14, I'm looking at the second movement. There's a spot here where he writes stems up, implying right hand, left, right, left. But actually a better fingering is to redistribute, so we have right, left, left. That's so much stronger and so much freer. So I have no problem about doing that. There's a neat website, if you want to go on and have a look at pianotricks.net. It's full of substitution, possibilities. Finally, articulation. Find a fingering that helps you manage the articulation. I'm thinking about Mozart here, K333 B flat sonata. The given fingering in the Urtext edition starts with a 5, which is very smooth. The fingering I prefer, because there's a little slur over the first 4 notes, if I use a 4, it kind of forces me to articulate. Can you hear the difference between that? It's much crisper than, which is too smooth for Mozart's style. So that's just a few ideas among many that I could have shown you about foundation fingering. I hope they've been helpful to you.